The first real shock arrives long before the snow does. It begins with the way Canadian cities brace for winter quietly, methodically, almost ritualistically, while Americans watching from the outside wonder why an entire population seems so unfazed by temperatures that border on the surreal. In most parts of the United States, winter is an interruption, a season that slows life down. But in Canada, it becomes the framework around which life continues. The cold doesn't signal retreat, it signals resilience. And that resilience shapes habits that many Americans describe as unbelievable. The atmosphere shifts as soon as the first icy wind sweeps across a Canadian street. Stores display mountains of salt bags at their entrances, snow shovels become everyday accessories, and neighborhoods seem to move with an instinctive understanding of what's coming. While Americans often prepare for winter storms by stocking up and staying in, Canadians prepare by adjusting their daily rhythm. Children walk to school through frost that crystallizes on their eyelashes. Commuters scrape windshields in temperatures that make the air itself feel brittle. Runners take to frozen sidewalks as if the cold were simply another training partner. And none of it is seen as extreme. It's just winter. The first impression for many Americans is disbelief. Breath fogs instantly in front of faces. Snowplows pass with the punctuality of public transit. People continue daily routines without hesitation, bundled in layers that turn sidewalks into moving tapestries of wool and insulation. The emotional climate is surprisingly calm. There is no panic in the streets, no frantic rush for the last loaf of bread. Instead, winter appears as a shared environment, one that demands cooperation. Neighbors check on one another. Drivers help push strangers out of icy parking spots. Entire communities operate as if the cold itself is a call to collective action. It's the smaller details that unsettle Americans most. The sight of cars plugged into block heaters overnight, glowing like metallic creatures tethered for survival. The normalization of snow pants as daily attire, not special occasion gear. The quiet acceptance that temperatures well below zero don't justify canceling plans. Even the way Canadians speak about winter casually, sometimes fondly, creates a cultural gap that feels almost cinematic. The cold becomes a shared character in the national story, shaping behavior, humor, and expectations in ways that outsiders rarely anticipate. Yet beneath these habits lies a deeper cultural difference, one that begins to reveal itself with each icy morning. For Canadians, winter builds a quiet toughness born from repetition. The snow will fall, the wind will bite, and life will go on. This steady understanding contrasts sharply with the American relationship to weather, where extreme cold often disrupts routine. In Canada, winter doesn't interrupt daily life, it defines it. And that definition influences everything from public infrastructure to personal mindset, creating a world where habits Americans call crazy are simply the necessary rituals of a country shaped by cold. As winter deepens, the cultural divide becomes even clearer. Americans often associate extreme cold with emergency measures, yet Canadians treat it as an ordinary backdrop to everyday life. The emotional atmosphere in cities shifts into something steady and practiced. Sidewalks fill with bundled figures moving in deliberate rhythms, each step softened by layers of snow that seem to mute the world. Even the cold air carries a certain calmness, the kind that heightens small sounds: the scrape of shovels, the crunch of boots, the low hum of passing plows working through dawn. What stands out most to Americans is the unspoken confidence Canadians display in their winter rituals. Block heaters are plugged in without complaint. Driveways are cleared before sunrise as if guided by some internal schedule. Salt trucks glide past in the early hours, restoring order to streets before commuters even wake. For many Americans, this level of coordination feels almost surreal. It reflects not just preparation, but an entire national rhythm synchronized to winter's demands. Deep cultural values reveal themselves in these habits. Patience surfaces everywhere, in lines at coffee shops where people stomp snow from their boots without frustration. In conversations that begin with remarks about the weather but end with mutual understanding of shared struggle. Canadians often frame winter not as a hardship but as a reminder that nature is a force to live with, not fight against. That acceptance shapes a collective mindset built on cooperation rather than complaint. It explains why neighbors shovel for one another without needing to be asked, and why strangers stop to help push a car from a snowbank with casual ease. Anecdotal patterns emerge that surprise Americans. Children dart through snowdrifts with a level of independence that would raise concern in warmer regions. Entire families walk through biting wind to community events as though frost were nothing more than background texture. Coffee shops become morning refuges, warm, bright spaces where boots thud softly against floors and layers of winter clothing peel away like protective shells. Even the ritual of saying sorry becomes more frequent, woven into the choreography of crowded winter spaces where politeness acts as insulation. Daily interactions reveal a symbolic behavior, winter as equalizer. Expensive coats and simple ones become indistinguishable under frost. Cars, regardless of make, struggle through icy mornings just the same. The season strips away markers of status and replaces them with a shared endurance. For Americans accustomed to a culture where individuality often shapes public life, this sense of collective identity can feel unfamiliar. The cold becomes a subtle teacher, reminding people that resilience grows not from standing alone, but from standing together. Slow transformations begin to take root in those who stay long enough. Many Americans find themselves adjusting without realizing it. Frost no longer feels like a warning but a signal to dress smarter. Early darkness becomes an invitation to slow down. The instinct to wait out storms fades, replaced by the Canadian approach: prepare well, step outside, continue on. What initially seemed crazy begins to feel practical, even grounding. Winter stops being something to fear and begins to feel like a season that shapes character, pacing, and perspective. These changes unfold quietly, revealing how environmental demands influence culture at its deepest level. Winter in Canada isn't simply a climate, it's a social force, shaping habits, bonds, and expectations with each snowfall. And for Americans living within this rhythm, the cold brings not just challenge, but clarity, reshaping how they see resilience, community, and daily life itself. As winter stretches into its longest months, the cultural contrast becomes most visible in the way Canadians normalize endurance. It isn't bravado. It isn't performance. It's a quiet, almost meditative resilience woven into ordinary days. Americans observing these patterns often describe them as extreme, but to Canadians, they are simply the habits that allow life to continue with steadiness. Each snowfall becomes a communal reset. Streets fill with fresh layers of white. People adjust their gait, tuck their scarves higher, and move forward without pause. The season teaches its own rhythm: slower, deliberate, and wavering. This steadiness shapes the emotional environment. Winter's wait does not isolate communities. It connects them. Crowded buses fill with the warmth of shared purpose rather than irritation. Neighbors linger for brief conversations in sub-zero air, steam rising between them like gentle punctuation. Acts of cooperation appear everywhere: drivers lowering their speed near icy crosswalks, passers-by stopping to brace open heavy doors, strangers instinctively checking if someone needs help navigating frozen steps. These gestures accumulate into an invisible network of communal care, one that Americans are often struck by for its naturalness. Anecdotal scenes repeat across the country: mittens left on fence posts for anyone who needs them, volunteers clearing sidewalks for elderly residents, children playing outside as snowflakes catch and wear upon hoods. Even the ritual of snow shoveling becomes symbolic, less a chore and more a moment where households align with the broader rhythm of the neighborhood. In these small habits, winter reveals something essential about Canadian social behavior. Hardship is met not with retreat, but with a soft kind of determination that values harmony over frustration. Over time, many Americans living in Canada experience a subtle transformation. They begin adopting the very habits they once found bewildering. They learn to layer instinctively, to step into the cold with acceptance rather than resistance, to interpret winter not as an obstacle but as an environment that shapes focus, discipline, and patience. Snowy mornings feel less like disruptions and more like recalibrations. The sight of bundled children walking confidently through frost no longer shocks them. Even the once mysterious block heater becomes a familiar, almost comforting detail of daily life. Winter starts to impose a kind of emotional order, a reminder that discomfort can be met with preparation, that shared challenges deepen collective trust, and that calmness often grows in places where nature demands respect. This shift, even when described objectively, reveals a deeper truth about cultural adaptation. Exposure to Canadian winter gradually reshapes the way many Americans interpret resilience. It stops being a performance of toughness and becomes an everyday practice of cooperation and presence. The cold teaches a different kind of endurance, one rooted in patience rather than pride. And as that understanding settles in, winter loses its strangeness. What once felt crazy begins to feel meaningful. By the time the snow finally melts and the landscape reveals its first hints of spring, the emotional imprint is unmistakable. Canada's winter habits show Americans a version of life where community rises to meet nature rather than resist it, where kindness becomes a practical tool, and where weather, however harsh, reminds people of their capacity to adapt with grace. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson winter leaves behind, that resilience doesn't need intensity. It grows in steady rhythms, shared struggles, and the simple willingness to face the cold together.